MNN, in partnership with League of Women Voters of the City of New York, presents Race to Represent, multimedia coverage of Manhattan elections, Council District 3 debate.
The League of Women Voters of the City of New York and the Manhattan Neighborhood Network are pleased to bring you a debate among the candidates running in the Democratic primary on September 10th in Council District 3. The winner will be the Democratic nominee for that seat in the November election. My name is Mary Jenkins, and I represent the League of Women Voters. All the candidates will be running in the new council districts that were drawn by the New York City Redistricting Commission following the results of the 2010 census. Each district represents approximately 168,000 residents. The candidates are seated in the order of their closing statements, and we'll have several rounds of questions. First question will be 1.5 minutes, and following that, the questions will be 1 minute and with 30-second rebuttals at my discretion. Starting from the right, let me introduce Corey Johnson and Yetta Kurland. The first question is for Mr. Johnson. Whoever wins the primary election for City Council District 3 will be representing approximately 168,000 residents. Do you know what your future constituents want you to work on first?
First of all, I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate. Thank you to Yetta for being here today to participate in the democratic process. The answer is yes. I do know a little bit about me before we do that. I grew up in public housing. My mom was my lunch lady. My dad was a Pepsi truck driver. He was a Teamster. I'm currently chair of Manhattan Community Board 4. I've been on the board for 8 years, serving the neighborhoods on the West Side. And what are people saying and what are voters saying in this election? A few things. One, I think there is a dire need for truly affordable housing. Middle-class people are falling behind, and there is a housing crisis in New York City. We have to make sure that we create true, permanent, affordable housing for New Yorkers who are falling behind and need a place to raise their family and make their claim in the community. Two is we need to make sure that we get a hospital for the Lower West Side of Manhattan. St. Vincent's Hospital tragically closed, and we have to make sure that hospital services are restored to the Lower West Side of Manhattan. Those are two big issues. The last issue is education. There is severe overcrowding for our children in New York City schools. We have to fight for more good public schools throughout the entire district on the West Side. We have great neighborhoods, from the West Village to Chelsea to Hell's Kitchen to the Upper West Side. We have to make sure that this district continues to be vibrant and livable for the people that make it home.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Kurland, what do you think your future constituents want you to work on first?
Sure. Job number one for me in City Council will be to continue the fight to restore a full-service hospital for the Lower West Side of Manhattan. I'm a community organizer. I've lived in the community for over 2.5 decades. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I was one of the lead organizers who represented the community in the fight to stop the closure of St. Vincent's Hospital and then to work to restore hospital services once we lost St. Vincent's Hospital. And together with 50 different community-based organizations, I helped organize over 8,000 community members called the Coalition for a New Village Hospital, and we worked for 3 years. And although we were too late to stop the closure of St. Vincent's Hospital because obviously it had gone into bankruptcy court, we were able to win an important victory, which is to force the Department of Health to admit that by law they're required to have a hospital at the site of St. Vincent's. Currently, they're only willing to give us a 2-bed hospital, which is not enough for our community. As you know, the entire Lower West Side of Manhattan does not have hospital services, but it's a good start, and I'll continue that fight as a city council member to make sure that we make that 2-bed hospital a 200-bed hospital and fully recover hospital services, level 1 trauma care services for the Lower West Side. I also think that we need to stand up to real estate interests. We need to fight for affordable housing, for public education. We also have to create jobs. I'm a small business owner who's created hundreds of jobs for the city, and I see my role as a city council member to fight for small businesses and to create jobs for our community.
Thank you, Ms. Kurland. The next question will go to you. And you both mentioned affordable housing, and you know how rare it is in Manhattan. What can the City Council do to preserve and expand the number of affordable housing units?
Sure. I think what the most important role in terms of affordable housing as a city council member is that I'll be on the ULURP process, which is the land use review process. In that capacity, I'll be able to approve or disapprove some of the requests for upzoning and development that come before us as a community. In that role, I'll be able to be an advocate to ensure that there's affordable housing and that there's sustainable development. And over the last 2.5 decades, I've really shown in my role with the Coalition for a New Village Hospital, in my role as a civil rights attorney, as a tenants' rights attorney, that I can stand up to some of the most special, most powerful special interests in this city to make sure that the community has a voice, so that this development is sustainable, it's responsible, it doesn't displace working New Yorkers and middle-class New Yorkers, and it gets us things like hospitals, like affordable housing, like public spaces, all too often missing in the landscape of New York City. In the last 10, 15 years, we've lost far too much affordable housing, and we've got to recapture affordable housing stock in the city of New York. And we'll be able to do that in the role as city council member on the ULURP process.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, what would you do as a city council member to expand affordable housing in our city?
As I said in my opening statement, I think that affordable housing is the #1 issue that this district faces. So what can be done? As Yetta mentioned, there is a ULURP process, which is the rezoning process, the process for special permits, variances, and the change in zoning. We have to make sure that that process is reformed. Right now, the process provides no consistency across the board on actually getting affordable housing when these developments occur. We have to change that process so that developers are required to provide affordable housing on anything they do for a residential building in the city and in this district. #2 is we have to strengthen rent protections. Too many affordable housing apartments have been lost because of vacancy decontrol. We have to strengthen rent protections. And 3 is we have to make sure that people that live in public housing, NYCHA, are protected and that we make sure that they are taken care of in the process. Affordable housing is the #1 issue. We have to invest public money into building true affordable housing.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, the Democratic candidates for mayor have proposed modifying mayoral control of the schools. What changes, if any, would you like to see? And do you have a position on putting charter schools in the same buildings with traditional public schools?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I do. I am completely against the co-location of charter schools in public schools. We have seen severe overcrowding in our public schools. And in this district, whether it's PS3 or PS41 or PS11 or PS111, we have great public schools. And what's happened was previously you would have 22, 23 third graders in a classroom. The next 5 years, those numbers will be up to 32, 33 third graders in a classroom. We have to fight against that. And charter schools moving into public schools is taking away space, classroom space, art space for public students who need that space. Mayoral control. We have to make sure that the process is changed. And what should happen is the panel for educational policy should be reformed. It should not be made up of just mayoral appointees. The borough presidents and the city council should have some say in who is on the PEP. And we have to make sure that no one can be removed because of their vote. There needs to be more accountability, and it needs to be more than just the mayor that has a voice in how the Department of Education is run in New York City.
Ms. Kurland, what changes would you like to see in modifying mayoral control of the schools? And also, do you have a position on putting charter schools in the same buildings with regular schools?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. First of all, I absolutely oppose co-locating charter schools in public schools. We need to be building more space for public schools, creating more public schools, not overburdening them with co-located charter schools, many of whom don't even have to pay rent for those public spaces. It's unfair, it's wrong, and I'll work to fight against that as a city council member. I like some of the ideas that have been put forward by the United Federation of Teachers and CSA, which is a supervisors union of principals. A couple ideas are to make sure that we're appointing people other than just the mayor having appointing power, so that, for example, the public advocate, the comptroller, or other citywide elected officials could appoint people. I think that we also need to include involvement from community, from parents. I think many times our public schools do better when we have community input and parental input. We need to take what we learned from the failure of mayoral control and some of what we learned from the platform before that, and really make sure that we have a voice of our community in the public schools.
Thank you. Ms. Kurland, the City Council receives approximately $50 million in discretionary and member item funding for the 51 districts. What is your position on how this funding is allocated, and who determines how the money should be used?
There's something that the Progressive Caucus is doing right now in terms of participatory budgeting that's really exciting. I think it goes a long way to reforming some of the problems that we've seen with discretionary funds. And what that does is it invites the community in a really meaningful way to participate in government. I think that's always a very good thing. It also helps us as a community determine what the most important uses of these public funds are. I think it does something else that's really important, which as elected officials, it reminds us that these are not these are not representatives, these are not elected officials' monies. These are the public monies, and it's our job as public servants to make sure that we're overseeing and using those monies in appropriate ways with full transparency. As somebody who's been a strong proponent of good government, as you know, I ran in 2009 when I opposed the extension of term limits and ran in the 2009 race. I will be a strong watchdog and advocate for good government and use some of these participatory budgeting ideas to make sure that happens.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, same question. How would you like to allocate that $50 million in discretionary and member funding? Do you think, how do you think it should be allocated?
I think the process needs to completely change. I agree with Yetta in participatory budgeting. I would be a full proponent, and I would participate in participatory budgeting to make sure that the community had a real voice. There is so much value to having let the community have a say in how their taxpayer dollars be spent. And they know what the priorities are sometimes where elected officials don't. So I would immediately and fully implement participatory budgeting in the 3rd Council District. But to go beyond that, I think that $51 million and how it's given out in discretionary funds needs to be completely changed. What do I mean by that? Right now, money is given out based on loyalty to the Speaker and the leadership of the Council. I think what we need to do is make sure that any money that's given out to any council member, any nonprofit, any group is done on a needs basis, is done based on if there is a real need, not done by the personality of the council member or who they're close with. I think the entire process of discretionary funds needs to be completely reformed.
Thank you. Turning to another topic, Mr. Johnson, Hurricane Sandy was a wake-up call, and the current mayor has called for a variety of new safeguards and barriers for the harbor and increased wetlands. Do you support these proposals, and how will we finance them?
The mayor laid out a very specific plan, multi-part plan. Part of it called for potentially a study of sea gates out by the Verrazano Bridge. It's been done in other places to try to protect the harbor if there is a storm surge. There were many good ideas in the mayor's proposal. Some of them was actually building more wetland, as you mentioned, and making sure that we have more oyster beds, marshes, natural protecting barriers. We're a city on water. And Hurricane Sandy proved that there isn't this 20-year storm. Now it's a every year storm, every 2-year storm. We have to be prepared for it. Hurricane Sandy really hit this district very hard. Chelsea, the West Village, Hudson Square completely lost power. I spent the days after Hurricane Sandy at the Elliott Chelsea houses, making sure that people had food and water, working with the National Guard. But we have to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Part of that is changing the way Con Ed operates, making sure that machinery is put on top of buildings, not in the basement. There's a lot that needs to be done. The mayor's had some very good things in his plan.
Thank you. Ms. Kurland, same question. Do you support the mayor's proposals on the safeguards for, that were just mentioned, and how will we finance them?
Well, I think the mayor put forward some ideas, but I think we have to go further. First of all, I'll say that Superstorm Sandy was a wake-up call. It made us understand on a very real basis this is not an issue of whether there will be another superstorm. Unfortunately, this is a matter of when there will be another superstorm. And we've got to acknowledge the fact that New York City is an island city, that climate change is real, and that we've got to move into this problem, not away from it. And some of the things that when Superstorm Sandy hit, I worked around the clock organizing with other community members. And as a community leader, I really seek to work and to lead from a bottom-up community spirit. And we saw the powerful effect of that during Superstorm Sandy. I worked with people, parents and students actually from PS3. We organized warm food to bring to West Beth residents when they were unable to get down. Their elevators were broken. They had no heat or hot water. We organized over 10,000 canned bottles of food and water that we distributed to folks all over the city. We need to employ that kind of community resilience in a broader plan, and we need to make sure we're setting our emergency workers up for success so that they can appropriately advocate when this happens again.
Ms. Kurland, currently the law would allow the city's wastewater treatment plants to accept waste from hydrofracking operations elsewhere. Such waste is toxic and hazardous and poses grave threats to our water supplies. As several New York counties have fracking waste legislation protecting their water supplies, would you introduce and support legislation giving New York City that same protection?
I absolutely would. First of all, I just want to say I'm thankful to hear that the League of Women Voters are talking about environmental issues. This is very important to our city. It's very important to this time, and I think that I would be very supportive of any type of legislation. I'd work closely with the state elected officials who are now trying to introduce similar legislation. I would work with them on a city level. As a civil rights attorney, I was one of the lead attorneys who brought a lawsuit to try to stop the Spectra pipeline. I oppose any type of hydrofracking. I call for a complete ban on hydrofracking. And I would also work carefully and closely with community organizers to try to continue the fight to stop the Spectra pipeline, which is a major pipeline coming into the city and into our district in specific that carries radon gas that is very dangerous. And I think that we have to find other solutions for sustainable long-term solutions for fuel in this city and frankly in this country.
Would you like me to repeat that question, Mr. Johnson?
No, I think I'm good.
Good.
Thank
okay.
you. I like Yetta, support an outright ban on hydrofracking. New York City has many assets. One of our biggest assets is our water supply, and that water is coming from 2 watersheds north of the city in upstate New York. What's happening? There has been proposed fracking in New York State. The only reason why fracking has not happened up against big special interests that have been fighting to drill in these precious, valuable watersheds is that activists and people rose up and said enough is enough, and they've been doing it for years now. They deserve to be applauded. Yetta said, and I applaud her activism on the Spectra pipeline, I too am outright opposed to the Spectra pipeline. It's already being constructed, it's already being built. There's a community lawsuit against the Spectra pipeline coming under the Hudson River Park, near Gansevoort Street, and then up 10th Avenue into Chelsea. It's dangerous, it's unnecessary. As Yetta said, it brings radon gas into residential apartment buildings. We have to make sure that we're working for clean energy. This is not the solution for New York City.
Yes, well, I'm glad to hear that you're both very knowledgeable about the environmental issues. So I'm going to ask you another question.
Great.
It deals with environmental issues. And we at the League also are very concerned about environmental issues. A floating liquid natural gas port for regasification liquid natural gas vessels has been proposed adjacent to the New York-New Jersey harbor. Insufficient time has been given for the public to become informed and provide input to be addressed in the environmental impact statement. What would you do to ensure that the public is protected from dangerous environmental hazards?
I go first?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for the question. I actually don't know about the specifics of this project. I'm hearing about this for the first time, but I can say that it's actually similar to what we just talked about on the Spectra pipeline, which is a public process. The pipeline was through FERC, which is a federal regulatory body, which really cut the public out of the process in discussing whether or not this is valuable for New Yorkers and our city as a whole. I think we have to make sure that New Yorkers have real valuable community input on any of these things that are going to affect our city. So what would I do? I think part of the job being a city council member is making sure that your community is informed, bringing people into the process, having them participate, and following their lead sometimes. Sometimes it's leading them, sometimes it's following their lead and bringing people together. On this particular project, it sounds like it's not about clean, sustainable, good energy for New York City. It seems to be, again, special interests coming into our city to make money against the best, will of New York City residents.
Thank you. Yes, there have been only 2 hearings scheduled for this, it's called Port Ambrose.
Yep.
And one of them was at Long Beach, Long Island. The other was in New Jersey. So I'm glad to hear that you would be interested in informing your constituents. So the same question to you, Ms. Kurland.
Sure. And I think what we learned as a community organizer, one of the things that I've learned is to work quickly to educate and organize the community. And oftentimes these environmental impact studies are done, like you said, in different locations. We're unaware of them. They don't have the full kind of transparency that we need to get out in front of the problem. That's what we encountered with the Spectra pipeline. By the time our lawsuit got involved, we were really too far gone with the FERC process and with the environmental impact study process. So I think time is of the essence. I think that I would use my tools as a civil rights attorney who has been doing this for decades, organizing and working against these types of special interests to get out in front of the problem and to use my bully pulpit as a city council member to bring hearings to the city council and to bring attention to this issue so that we could actually stop the problem in advance. And just by way of example, again, I was one of the lead organizers with St. Vincent's Hospital. We weren't able to save St. Vincent's, but other hospitals like Litch that are now on the chopping block learned a lot of lessons about getting out in front of the problem because of some of the work that we did to save St. Vincent's.
Okay. Next question is for you, Ms. Kurland. There may be a change in the stop and frisk policy. What else would you do to make our streets and neighborhoods safer?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to talk about stop and frisk. I was one of the lead attorneys who brought federal legislation to reform both stop and frisk and also some of the police activities that we saw during the Occupy Wall Street movement. I was one of the attorneys representing folks who were protesting during Occupy Wall Street. And some of my clients were actually City Council Member Jumaane Williams, City Council Member Tish James, City Council Member Melissa Mark Viverito, and City Council Member Ajanis Rodriguez, as well as members of the press. We have to make sure that our police officers are set up for success, and we want to make sure that they're effectuating policies properly. Stop and frisk as a policy when probable cause exists is actually an effective tool for law enforcement. The problem that we're seeing is that stop and frisk is happening without probable cause, and it's horribly hurting marginalized communities like communities of color and, frankly, the LGBT community as well. I also think that we need more cops on the beat with community policing, where we're really teaching our police officers to reflect and to respect the communities that they represent.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, what would you do to make our specifically District 3 community safer?
Well, we're lucky. This district is pretty safe. We do have crime. We do have homicide. We do have robberies. We have to make sure it remains safe and get even safer. A few things. I agree with Yetta on stop and frisk. We have to completely reform stop and frisk. Numbers don't lie. And what the numbers say is that 99% of stops do not result in any gun being found. Stop and frisk was supposed to happen to try to get guns off the streets. What we've seen is neighborhoods divided. African American, Latino families not wanting to send their 12-year-old son to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk because they're afraid he may be stopped and frisked by a police officer. That's not what I aspire for our city to be like. We need more police on the street. We need to make sure that local police precincts have adequate resources, that they have more cops. We have to make sure we have a new recruit class coming in to actually put more police on the streets. Some of the mayoral candidates have talked about this. I would be supportive of that, but stop and frisk is not a policy that I think has worked in its current form, and we have to make sure that it's changed.
Thank you very much. We're now up to the time for your closing statements, and you have 1 minute, Mr. Johnson, and following that, 1 minute for Ms. Curlin. You may begin on your closing statement.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting us. Thank you to Yetta for participating. It's great to be here. I want to be a true community activist and advocate in the City Council. I am very honored for the 8 years that I've spent in the community board fighting for more affordable housing, more good public schools, making sure that local small business can exist and thrive in our community. I am very honored to have been endorsed by Congressman Jerry Nadler, former State Senator Tom Duane, Assembly members Deborah Glick, Linda Rosenthal, and Dick Gottfried, the Working Families Party, the United Federation of Teachers, and over 700 local community leaders. They've endorsed me because they've seen the work that I can do. I can work with other people and achieve real results. I have a real track record in this community of taking on any battle that exists, and I want to do that on the council. Thank you all for watching. I look forward to meeting you on the campaign trail, and thank you again to the League of Women Voters. I would be honored to have your support in the September 10th Democratic primary.
Ms. Curlin, your closing statement.
Sure. So first of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to MNN for hosting this event. My name is Yetta Curlin. I'm a candidate for City Council here in the 3rd City Council District. I'd be honored to have your support. I'm a small business owner. I'm an educator. I'm a civil rights attorney. For over 2.5 decades, I've worked to bring real results to this district. I've shown that I can come together and bring together a community of over 8,000 community members to fight to restore hospital services. I've shown that I can win major victories for women in the workforce, including women in the FDNY and fair promotional practices and fair working environments. I've been able to stand up for tenants, fighting to get tenants to be able to keep their rent stabilized and rent-controlled apartments. And I really have shown I can be an outspoken, honest, independent voice for this community. I think this community needs somebody who's willing to stand up for them, to stand up to the special interests, and really be an advocate for this community. I'd be honored to have your support, and I look forward to your vote on Tuesday, September 10th.
I want to thank both candidates for participating in today's debate. For more information about voting, the candidates, the location of your poll site, please contact the League of Women Voters, New York City at, and this is our website, www.lwvnyc.org. And on our website, you may access vote411.org. This will be the best place for you to get information regarding all the primary candidates. If you don't have internet access, you can call us at 212-725-3541. Remember, only registered voters enrolled in the political party having a primary election may vote on September 10th. All registered voters, regardless of party, vote in the general election on November 5th. Thank you.